eat anything here. Don't eat the frickin' fruit, and I'm not kidding. You will get sick.
Half the bars rescued on Bar Rescue didn't survive after the cameras left. For years, Jon Taffer walked into failing businesses, rebuilt them from the ground up, and gave desperate owners one last chance to save everything. But once the relaunch night ended and the crew packed up, reality set in.
You're an irresponsible ass, and my wife probably got sick because of you.
So which bars actually followed Jon's advice and stayed open? And which ones collapsed the moment the show stopped watching? Join us as we uncover what really happened to the bars that actually listened to Jon Taffer.
Do you know how old that oil is?
No.
Do you see how thin the oil is? All the properties of the oil is completely broken down. All you're doing is boiling food in old oil that's dirty.
Moonrunner's Saloon. In early 2013, Jon Taffer walked into a bar called Characters Quarters in Garner, North Carolina, a suburb south of Raleigh, and found exactly the kind of slow-motion disaster the show thrives on. The owner had a sister helping him run it. The two of them could not agree on anything. The kitchen was failing, the bar had no idea what it wanted to be, and the whole operation had the energy of a place that had given up and was simply waiting for someone to officially call it. A bar that once had potential had drifted into a no-man's land of generic drinks, indifferent service, and a decor scheme that communicated nothing to anyone walking past on the street. The neighborhood around the bar, however, was a completely different story. Jon's market research showed an underserved audience for Southern-themed food and drink, a gap in the local market sitting right outside the door of a bar too confused about its own identity to fill it. The demographic was there. All that was missing was a bar worth walking into. Jon built one from scratch in 48 hours. What Jon built in that space was Moonrunner's Saloon. The concept was Prohibition-era moonshine culture. Bootlegger portraits on the walls, a moonshine distillery behind the bar, denim uniforms, Southern comfort food from Chef Brian Duffy, and a cocktail program from mixologist Russell Davis built entirely around moonshine variants. On relaunch night, the crowd came through the door and kept coming. The staff ran out of product before the night ended, which is about as good as a stress test can go. It is the specific kind of problem every rescued bar owner hopes to have, and most of them never do. The concept had been designed for exactly the people who showed up, and exactly the people who showed up loved it. And then the owner kept going. He kept going through 2014 and 2015, when most rescued bars were quietly reverting. He kept going when Bar Rescue came back to film not one, but two follow-up segments, something the show almost never does because what was happening at Moonrunners was worth showing twice. He launched a food truck in 2016, taking the signature moonshine sauces and Southern recipes out of the bar and into the Raleigh area market. He kept going through a global pandemic that killed roughly 30% of all bars and restaurants in the United States. And then, when the pandemic ended, instead of limping back to capacity, he expanded. In a February 2025 press release, owner Charles Alexander announced that Moonrunners had opened 2 new locations in late 2024, one in Garner and one in Dunn, North Carolina, and grew the team from 22 employees before the pandemic to over 100 employees after it. The original location from the episode has since closed due to rising crime and homelessness in that specific corridor. But the brand Jon built from a confused, dying bar is thriving at newer addresses as of early 2026, operating 2 full restaurants, a food truck, a cigar and whiskey night every Thursday, and what it describes as the world's largest moonshine menu. Moonrunners is the longest arc, a rescued bar that became an actual brand. The next story is shorter, but no less remarkable, Because it is about an owner whose personal grief had swallowed his business whole, and whose rescue required Jon to do something he does not always do, which is put the screaming down and actually listen. Triple Nickel Tavern. J.J. Greuter opened Triple Nickel Tavern in Colorado Springs, Colorado in 2005 as a tribute to his father, a military veteran, and in its early years it was pulling in around $25,000 a month and functioning as a real hub for the punk and metal music community in the city. JJ was not a reluctant bar owner running someone else's concept. He was a genuinely passionate one who had built something real from a community he actually belonged to. The bar had an identity. It had regulars who cared about it. It had a reason to exist that went beyond square footage and liquor licenses. Then JJ's family was hit by multiple cancer deaths in a relatively short stretch of time, and the person running the bar disappeared inside his own grief while the lights stayed on. What grief does to a business is surprisingly specific. JJ stopped making decisions. He gave regulars free drinks because saying no felt wrong when everything else had already gone wrong. He chased away new customers by acting more like the loudest guy at the party than the person responsible for it. He let $150,000 of debt pile up while the kitchen sat empty and his bartenders could not make a cocktail. The interior had somehow drifted into country western decor that had nothing to do with the punk identity JJ had always claimed for the place, which is the kind of detail that tells people exactly how far an owner has mentally left the building. By the time Bar Rescue showed up for Season 5, Episode 12, the staff was essentially unsupervisable because the owner had emotionally checked out years earlier, and the bar was running on fumes and familiarity. The episode is titled Punk as a Drunk, and what makes it one of the more interesting rescues in the show's catalog is what Jon chose not to do. Having watched the Pirates Tavern disaster in Season 2, where he had stripped a themed bar of its entire personality and replaced it with a generic concept that the owner rejected on camera and dismantled the moment he left, Jon read JJ differently. The connection to the punk identity was not an affectation. It was the only genuine thing left in a bar that had lost almost everything else. So Jon kept it. He gutted the country decor and rebuilt the interior around the aesthetic the bar had always claimed to be. He brought in mixologist Lisa Marie Joyce and chef Jason Santos to build a food and drink program that actually served the crowd. He designed a blackberry tequila cocktail specifically to bring female customers through the door alongside the established male audience. And then he did the thing that does not appear on a renovation timeline. He addressed the grief directly, on camera, and JJ heard him. A decade on, Triple Nickel Tavern has moved to a new location across the street from the original, which it occupies as of early 2026. Reviews on Yelp and Google have held at 4 stars and above consistently, and the live music program is cited in nearly every positive review as the bar's heartbeat. JJ brought back some of the original decor elements after customers complained the replacements felt too cheap, which is exactly the kind of owner-driven refinement that looks like reversion from the outside, but is actually engagement. He is not undoing Jon's work. He is finishing it. The booking calendar is full. The cover charge for live music is $10. The kitchen runs every day. Triple Nickel Tavern is doing exactly what it was designed to do, in a slightly different building, with a slightly different ceiling, because an owner decided that staying meant more than going back. Both of those cases involve owners who fought their way to the other side of a personal or creative crisis and came out running better businesses. The next case is something else entirely, because Jon did not go to fix a bad owner. He went because a hurricane had taken nearly everything, and what he left behind has outlasted the disaster that created it. El Karajo Beach Bar. El Karajo Beach Bar in Puerto Rico appeared in one of the most unusual episodes Bar Rescue has ever produced. Jon went to the island specifically to help rebuild a bar that Hurricane Maria had torn apart in 2017. Maria was a Category 5 storm that destroyed and severely damaged an estimated 90% of Puerto Rico's hospitality infrastructure and left the island in a state of economic collapse that lasted years. The format Jon usually relies on, the hidden cameras, the confrontational sit-down, the owner who needs to hear some hard truths about their own decisions, was completely absent from this episode because none of those things applied. These owners were not the problem. They had not mismanaged their way into ruin, or ignored their regulars, or hired their cousin's friend to tend bar because it was easier than finding someone qualified. They had simply been in the path of a hurricane. What they needed was not a reckoning, but walls. Jon brought all of it. He brought corporate sponsors who donated materials. He brought celebrity friends who donated labor. He brought his expert network of mixologists and chefs who rebuilt the program from the ground up. The episode, titled Operation Puerto Rico, became one of the most watched in the show's history, precisely because it stripped away the drama and replaced it with something that felt more honest. Competent people helping other competent people rebuild after a disaster that had nothing to do with bad decisions. The owners already knew how to run a bar. They just did not have a bar left to run. Jon gave them one back. As of 2023, El Karajo held a 4.2-star rating on Google and was consistently drawing both tourists and local patrons. The Facebook page went quiet in early 2023, which is not unusual for a small beach bar that relies on word of mouth and foot traffic rather than social media marketing, and no closure announcement has been made. Remove the variable of an owner who might revert, and the system Jon installs tends to hold. The beach bar in Puerto Rico is still there because the people running it never needed to be convinced of anything. They just needed the walls put back up. 3 different bars, different crises, and different kinds of owners. But all 3 of them are still standing in 2026 for the same underlying reason. They treated what Jon gave them as a foundation to keep building on, not a finish line to stop at. But not all of them were able to sustain that change. What actually happened to the ones that never make it? The $1 million warning. In Season 4, Jon walked into the Los Angeles Brewing Company and invested $1 million. He installed a self-service beer tap system, set up an in-house brewing operation, rebuilt the entire concept as Le Brew Co., and left with what looked on camera like a genuinely transformed business. The relaunch night drew a crowd. The concept was solid. The equipment was real and expensive and working. From the outside, everything looked like it had taken. 4 months later, the brewing system had never been turned on. The self-serve taps had been disconnected. The menu was back to what it was before Jon had ever arrived. The liquor license had been suspended, and the bar was listed for sale. Every single change that had been made during the rescue had been reversed. Not over several months. Not gradually, but almost immediately once the cameras were gone, and the energy of the relaunch had dissipated, and the owner was alone in the space with his own habits and his own ideas. $1 million, 4 months, and the bar looked exactly the way it had looked before any of it happened. That is not an exaggeration. Unfortunately, it is the ceiling of what ignoring Jon actually looks like. Everything after this point in the story is the opposite of that. The bars that survived are not the ones that got the biggest renovations or the most dramatic episode moments. They are the ones whose owners understood something that no amount of television drama can fully communicate. That Jon is not selling a makeover, but a way of running a bar. The paint dries, and the cameras leave, and then it is just the bar owner, his staff, and whether or not they actually run the place the way he showed them. Reality TV Updates, which tracks the current status of every bar ever featured on Bar Rescue, has documented this pattern across hundreds of follow-ups. The bars that closed almost always closed because the owner reverted. The bars still open in 2026 are the ones whose owners never went back. So, why do half the rescued bars close? And what is actually going on in the ones that never make it? Why half of them fail anyway? The number that gets thrown around most often when people talk about bar rescue is 50%. Roughly half of all the bars Jon has visited are still open. The rest are gone. Critics of the show use this figure as evidence that the rescues do not work. What those critics never mention is the baseline. The industry runs around 60% closures in year one and 80% within 5 years across all bars and restaurants. The businesses Jon visits are not fresh startups. They are operations that have been grinding toward collapse for years, carrying debt and dysfunction that most consultants would look at and quietly recommend walking away from. Against that baseline, 50% surviving is not a television show failing its subjects. It is a television show outperforming what the industry would have predicted for these specific businesses without any intervention at all. The bars that close almost always close for the same reason. The owner went back. They accepted the renovation because it was free, and because the cameras were rolling, and because who turns down a lifeline when the alternative is losing everything? And then the crew drove away, and the regulars came back and said they missed the old menu, and the owner's cousin, who had been bartending before the rescue, wanted his shift back, and one small compromise at a time. The bar quietly returned to the shape it had been in before Jon ever showed up. The equipment is still there. The new name might still be on the sign. The fresh paint is still on the walls. But the thing that actually determines whether a bar survives, which is the daily discipline of running it the right way, on the days when nobody is watching and nobody is filming and nothing is stopping you from doing whatever you want, has been quietly replaced by the comfortable, familiar failure they already knew how to manage. The Ella Brucco story is the extreme version of this. $1 million, 4 months, every single change reversed. But the same dynamic plays out in 100 smaller and less dramatic ways across every season of the show. Jon has talked about this pattern across multiple interviews outside the show, and his explanation for it is not flattering, but it is accurate. Most bar owners, he says, open a bar to live a certain kind of life, not to run a certain kind of business. They want the community and the identity and the feeling of being the person who owns the place where everyone gathers. The actual mechanics of running a profitable hospitality operation, the inventory management and the staff training and the poor cost and the concept alignment with the local demographic are not the reason they open the bar. They are the part they tolerate to get to the part they actually want. When Jon comes in and makes those mechanics non-negotiable, the owners who stay rescued are the ones who can bridge that gap. The ones who close are the ones who cannot. That gap is also why the screaming works, as uncomfortable as it is to watch. Jon is not screaming because he enjoys it, though he is clearly not suffering through it either. He is screaming because the owners he visits have been politely told the same things by their accountants and their family members and their remaining bartenders for years, and the polite version did not land. The screaming is the signal that this time the conversation is actually happening, that someone with the knowledge to back it up is refusing to let the owner off the hook with another round of "we're working on it" and "things have been tough." The bars that listened are almost always the bars whose owners, in that moment of Jon losing his temper at something real and specific, felt something shift in their chest and decided, quietly,
He's sending out raw food with her. We got to stop this, chef.
that enough was enough. Which rescued bar do you think deserved more credit than it got? And which closure genuinely surprised you? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.